Hi, this is Erica of Grapefruit and Gardenia Designs, and we're going to talk today about the Nourishment cowl and sizing, as well as modifications that you might want to make to customize this pattern. So I did get a question from someone participating in the knit along, and rather than only answer that person, I thought I would record a video that more universally talks about some of the subjects that come up when you are looking at patterns and your size and making modifications. So I'm wearing today one of the Nourishment cowls. The original prototype, which is the one that the measurements and the gauge are based on, is still up at Junction Fiber Mill. But this one is close enough that I can still use it to make the points I'm going to make. And when I insert photos, I will insert the photos of the one that is completely done at gauge as the prototype for reference. So one of the things I wanted to start with is where it is a cowl. It is not a poncho, but it is designed to fit over your shoulders. So if, as it's written, you feel like it's not going to be a comfortable fit over your shoulders for how you want it to fall and the length you want it to be, there are ways that you can modify the pattern. And I want to empower you to do that and give you some of the tips, tricks, suggestions along the way. I can't provide full pattern support for every modification you're going to make, but I can certainly help empower you to make those decisions yourself. And then as we're having a knit along, if you want to ask questions of the group, that's a great thing to do in a knit along with the community. So for starters, the way that this falls with the length and therefore the overall width, which is probably the biggest concern of people when they're looking at not only will this fit me, but how will it fit me? And where it falls is between the upper bust and the full bust. So this is not meant to be a poncho that's going to hang down to 3/4 of your arm or even over your full bust. And that's important to know because as we look at grading, things are not a straightforward increase percentage-wise as we grade. There are some parts of our bodies that through an entire range of grading really don't change. One of those is the shoulder drop area. I believe the standard for that is 1.5 inches across all sizes. So if you make an assumption that because someone is looking for a size that's at the high end of the grading range, they're going to need more depth, for example, that's just not the case when you look at real life examples. And so that's why this isn't always the most straightforward way to answer, because even in those standards, there's a lot of differentiation between people's individual bodies. So what I'm going to do today is share a little bit of information that I hope will help you customize the cowl, not only so that it fits you, but so that it fits you as you'd like at the points of your body where you'd like. Okay, so let's get started with me, my size. Again, I'm going to insert pictures wearing the original prototype, and you're going to see how that fits someone with my measurements. I also have pictures of my mother who has very different measurements wearing the exact same cowl. So I think that's an important reference. So let me see. I have these things all written in a few different places. My upper bust measurement and my full bust measurement is somewhere in the 36 to 37 inches range. And somewhere I have this all written out in centimeters too. I do have an addendum I'm going to share with you, and that has inches and centimeters for different measurements. But so again, I fluctuate a lot in my size. I've kind of looked at it this morning with 2 different tape measures, and we'll say my full bust is probably somewhere around the it is just 36 to 37. It depends exactly what undergarments I have on and how I'm measuring that with which measuring tape. I don't have a lot of differentiation between my upper bust measurement and my full bust measurement. And some of that has to do even just with bone structure. I am 5'9" approximately. And like I said, I'm going to insert how does this cowl look on me? This is one, yes, but it's a little bit different from the one that's totally spot on with gauge. I also have a neck that is only about 12 inches. That is below the lowest range of a grade. So I, am definitely not in a standard proportion. And one of the things you can see here, and granted I have the microphone on it, but you can see how this neck is, it has more ease. There is certainly far more space around this neckline than my neck requires. And I knitted this one, the top of this one, on a US 7 needle. I've done some where I've knitted it on a US 6 needle. Okay, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the point is ease everywhere from your neck to your shoulders, to your upper bust, your full bust, your upper arms. It is all a component of what goes into how you want this cowl to fit and what adjustments you might choose to make that maybe wouldn't be part of what you'd consider to be a standard grade. They're really customized, and that's why knitting is something that's so unique. We can customize it without having to take something to a tailor. So my mother took measurements, and she has approximately a 41-inch upper bust and then 43.5-inch full bust. She wears the same cowl that I'm wearing, the exact same one, not just one knitted to the same gauge, but the exact same one, and she's approximately 5'2". I tell you this because as you look at it, what you'll see is, for me, the full neck is truly a full neck. For my mom, I kind of joke, it looks like it's swallowing her. For my mom, if I were going to make her one of these cowls, I would make her the 5-inch height rather than the 6-inch height. And I would definitely make hers on a US 7, whereas I might make mine on a US 6, just for the top section. Okay, those are a few ways that we can play around with gauge, play around with ease, and not change the stitch count. Now, one of the easiest places to change the stitch count is the neck. So just to use that as an example, the cast on is 104 stitches. You will require, for the Florentine frieze, a multiple of 4 stitches. For the seed stitch at the very top, you require a multiple of 2. It's easier to use a multiple of 4 for your cast on because then you won't have to adjust between the seed stitch and the Florentine frieze. When you're looking at the pattern, what you will see, I have it next to me, right next to the schematic, is you're going to see this little blurb. And I actually put this in after test knitters gave me some feedback that they were having trouble getting gauge. And I said, oh gosh, we'll have a whole little separate chat about to gauge swatch or not to gauge swatch if you'd like. But one of the things is, with a pattern that has so many stitch patterns in it, you're looking at an average across stitch patterns for a lot of it, particularly the bottom part, in order to get that overall fit. The Florentine frieze at the top is very important, the gauge, because that gauge is what's going to make the ease around your neck. So why does that matter? Do you swatch in Florentine frieze or do you swatch in stockinette? What do you do? Most of my test knitters who did not get stockinette gauge got Florentine frieze gauge. So my advice would be, do not drive yourself crazy. It's an accessory. You know you're knitting. Chances are, if you're knitting this with Junction Fiber Mill, you've knitted with it before. If you haven't, do a little swatch. It's more important that you make sure you're going to get a fabric that you like and a feel that you like. And if you're getting that on a needle, even if it's not the exact match for a stockinette gauge, you're probably going to be okay. So you're going to jump into the Florentine frieze pattern. And you know beforehand, the overall circumference for this pattern is 22 to 23 inches in the neck, which is 56 to 58.5 centimeters. If that is way too big for you, start with a stitch count that's a multiple of 4 that's less. Do the math, get the circumference you want. If it's too small for you, increase it. Now, I have to say one thing that's very important about this pattern is that there is no built-in buffer for yardage. There's a couple reasons for that. Usually designers, including myself, will put in about a 10% buffer, so there's plenty of yarn to do your swatch and not have to unravel it, to account for changes in gauge, and have people not sweating it out with yarn chicken. But this accessory I really did design to use up every bit of a making track skein so that you wouldn't have stuff left over in your basket when that skein's so pretty that you want to use the whole thing. Okay, so if you are making adjustments and you are making this cowl bigger, 100% you need another skein of making tracks. And you may very well also need one of whatever your main color will be. Depending, some people have had a little bit more left over of that one. So that's important to mention. So you've done your Florentine frieze section. You've got the circumference and ease that you want. I hope I finished that thought. And now you're getting into the rest of the depth here. And what do you want to do? And where do you need to do it? So I'm going to once again reference this book, The Knitting Pattern Writing Handbook by Christina McGrath and Sarah Woolworth. One of the things that's important is it's important to know your own measurements, and it's important to not necessarily know, but understand grading measurements. Let me see, okay. And here's a picture. And the reason for that is some people in their head who maybe haven't knitted a ton of things, maybe haven't made a garment, they might think, I need more everywhere. And it's not necessarily true. Sometimes as you get larger in sizes, you want less ease in certain areas. Sometimes there is consistency with measurements across sizes that you might not think that there is. And I've got a lot of background noise right now, sorry. I'm gonna see if I can give you an example of that. I know I mentioned, I don't know if I did it in my first take, which is what I suspect, the shoulder drop is 1.5 inches across all grades. So it's not just a matter of changing percentages everywhere, it's looking at measurements at each point and making sure that ease is consistent or is adjusted appropriately for the fit that you're looking for. So this is a great resource. There are a number of them. And the other thing that can be a really, really helpful tip is to get these try-on cords. We have barber cords, we have better than scrap yarn. You can use scrap yarn, so that's why I have this as my reminder. But these cords, if you haven't seen them, of course they're great for sweaters, they're great for a lot of things. People use them for provisional cast-ons, but they're cords, you pop them on the end of your needles, you slide your stitches off, and you try something on. And that is important because you don't want to be making guesses as you go. Take a few extra minutes, try it on. You might find that you didn't need more width in an area you thought you would, or that you do need more in an area you thought you wouldn't. So these try-on cords, especially as you're working top down for this, are a gift, because what I want you to do is figure out your Florentine frieze, whatever you want to do for that. Finish that, and then if you're not sure, put it on try-on cords and see, where do I think I want growth in this? If the dimensions of the pattern have me a little bit concerned about the fit on my body or the body of the person I'm giving it to. So another thing that's important, the construction of this is done similarly to a yoke sweater. And what that means is essentially, if you did not have the neck here and you just started as if this was a sweater, what you're looking at is doing fairly rapid increases at the beginning and then making increases in certain sections, but not every other row. Like when you are doing a raglan sweater, you're consistently making your increases along that raglan line. When you're doing a yoke sweater, you're looking at a couple different constructions. One is like a wedge construction, and then one is where you're doing these increases in areas that are, if you're working on a colorwork motif or you're working on stitch patterns that have a certain number of stitches required, they're before and after those. So very similar to a yoke sweater. One of the things you can look at is, do I have a yoke sweater that I've knitted that fits me well, where I really like the yoke depth, and I also like the rate of increase? And you can use that for comparison. And that can help guide you to the modifications you want to make and where you want to make them. Couple other things that I'll mention toward the end, but let's walk you through it a little bit. So we already said you're going to need a multiple of 4 for the Florentine frieze, a multiple of 2 for any sections of seed stitch bands. This here is the beam stitch. You're going to need a multiple of 10 stitches for this. And then very important to remember, when you get to the end, if you've made modifications on your stitch count, you're going to need to adjust the setup for the split hem. So when it tells you how many stitches to move over, you can't just move that number of stitches. It's going to be based on your final number at the end. So let's give you a little example. This is by no means prescriptive, but this is an example of someone who says, I'm going to modify. What do I do? Okay, this person has decided 104 stitches is going to be a little bit too small, because even though it would fit them, it would fit their neck, they want to have more ease. And so they've decided to cast on 120 stitches. That number of 120 stitches is divisible by 2 for the seed stitch and divisible by 4 for the Florentine frieze. At gauge, their upper neck circumference of the garment, not their body, is going to be about 25¼ inches, or 64 centimeters. So they go through, they work their Florentine frieze. After the Florentine frieze, you're at the spot that is like the neckline for your sweater, just before if you were to put on a collar or a ribbing. And that's where you're going to increase. Again, it's not necessarily a direct percentage-wise, but you're going to increase about 25% of your stitches, and you're going to do that evenly across the round to a number that's once again divisible by 2 for seed stitch. So in this example, what I've done is I have had the person increase by 30 stitches from 120 stitches to 150 stitches. In order to do this evenly across the round, you're going to knit 4, make 1 left, all the way around. And at gauge, this is going to be approximately 33¼ inches. Okay, so you can compare that to a sweater, like I said, or you could use a tape measure. It's a little bit of a funny angle to get, but you can kind of say, where would that put me? You know, what's my body measurement? And then that's the garment measurement. And is that how I want it to sit? After that, okay, so let's see. We're going through, you have your band of seed stitch here. You're going to do another increase round before the beam stitch. And this is where, again, grading tables and your own measurements are going to matter, because there's less differentiation here, there's more differentiation here. Also this, which is your shoulder width, there's a range of about, I believe, 4 inches to 6.5 inches. So if someone has 6.5, it's going to come out a little bit further. And if it comes out a little bit further, do you want to have more stitches here? And that's why the try-on cords are great. This is something where you can adjust pretty quickly as you go. There's not intricate lace patterns. There's really these bands, and the stitch counts are quite easy to add things in. So in this example, following the stockinette and seed stitch, the person's going to increase about another 20%, which is about another 30 stitches, from 150 stitches to 180 stitches. To increase evenly, they are going to increase after every 5th stitch by knitting 5 and making 1 left. 180 stitches is already divisible by 10 for the beam stitch. So in this example, the person's not going to then have an adjustment row. In the case of the pattern, you'll see an adjustment row where it's only adjusting by 1 or 2 stitches to accommodate the stitch pattern. But if you're already at that stitch count for a repeat, you don't need to do that. You don't want to skip the round, because that's going to affect length. Your row gauge and the number of rows, right, is what's going to affect your length here. So if you don't need an adjustment round, you'll simply knit that round even, knit to beginning of round. This is all in an addendum I'm going to post, so you don't have to be taking notes and writing it down. At gauge, what's going to happen to this person is they are going to be at a circumference of approximately 40 inches then at this point. I do have it written down. Let's see if I put it here. I do have it written down how that compares to the original pattern, but I will find that for you in a second. And I'll review how each one compares. So going back to the example, after the beam stitch now, this person is going to increase about another 20% from 180 to 216 stitches. I outline exactly how they're going to do that. Again, it's a knit 5, make 1 left. And at gauge, that's going to put them at about 48 inches at this point. This is where it's going to matter if you're looking to only add width or also add length, okay? Because as you go down with your depth, it's going to make a difference how far it has to go around your arm, your upper bust, and that's where there is going to be more differentiation than there is higher up. And so if you do plan to increase length as well as width, this is an area right here after the beam stitch where you could consider a more significant increase. Now you're going to go down one more time and you're going to do another increase. In this case, it's a smaller one, but this is because I'm ending higher. And so in the example here, you're going to need to get to a multiple of 4. That's important. So this person has gone from 216 stitches to 243 stitches. And then they're going to do an adjustment. And so, as I said with the prior increase, if you're looking to add length, this is another space where you're going to do a more significant increase. If you're not looking to add length, you're not going to want to, because you don't want it to kind of bell out here. But if you're adding length, right, it's going to come down here and you're going to need that additional width and length, if that makes sense. So in this example, the person is ending with 244 stitches. And what that means is when they do the split hem, they're going to split that so it's 122 on the front and 122 on the back. That's going to give them at gauge a bottom circumference of approximately 54 inches. And it's important to remember that with the split hem, you sort of gain an inch or 2 on each side because it's not together here, right? You have this additional width. And what that helps with too is that depending on where it's sitting on your bust, if it were pulling across, you're more likely to get it to flip up like this, right? Flip up. When you have this, it gives you just a little bit more so that it can hang. So I hope that is all helpful information. I am going to find a place to post this addendum that I put together. Please keep in mind that I may get this tech edited, but this is not tech edited right now. This is me trying to put together a tutorial to help people who are trying to make their own modifications. So the pattern is very tight. It's tech edited. It is tested. I have knitted it multiple times. And the sample has been knit for Junction Fiber Mill. This addendum is meant to help guide you make modifications, but at this time I just put it together, so it's not tech edited. So the other things I wanted to mention, I'm going to insert those photos that I said. My kitty always likes to make an appearance. I think that I have given you all the tips that I had written down. I wanted to make sure to share. Maybe one thing I didn't say is, if you are deciding one of the ways you would like to modify is to make a deeper split hem here, maybe you're adding length and you still want the split hem to start high because you want to add even more space, I would recommend considering a selvage stitch on the edges so it looks just a little bit more polished if you're going to make it deep. I kind of like the farm yarn rustic look of this, and I did not put a selvage stitch because it's so small, and I liked that with it. But if I were doing a deeper split hem, I would add a selvage stitch. So that's something to look for. And another thing to mention is a lot of people will use short rows. You can use them in the front, you can use them in the back. It depends on your body type. And if you've knitted a lot of sweaters and you know that, it's certainly a more advanced, not technique, but advanced knowledge of where you would put that to make something work for you. So those are things you could consider. You could also consider if you wanted the back to be longer than the front, you could, after you make the split, you could just knit the back longer. I do that in some other patterns. I don't do it in this one because this one has enough coverage with the full circumference. Whereas sometimes if I'm making more of a dicky style, I will do a longer hem in the back. I don't know, just the way it covers your back, I think it's a little bit different. So basically my suggestions are, if you want to add, you consider adding more increases at the same points that they already are in the pattern, but based on your own measurements and how much ease you want at those points. Okay, I hope that's helpful. So I said I was going to mention what would this pattern be, what would the modification I just gave you be at different points. So this pattern, you're talking about 22 to 23 inches up here at the top. The modification was 25.25. This pattern, when you get to the first increase, it's going to take you to about 29 inches. The modification would take you to about 33.33. The next increase, 34.5 inches. The modification, 40 inches. And then as you get toward the bottom, you're looking at 42.5 inches compared to 48 inches. And then the final dimension, 49 inches on this pattern compared with 54.25 in the modification. And then you get the additional bit from the split hem. I hope this helps everyone. If you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. The hard part for me is, can I answer them on the timeline that you're on, because I do have a number of things going on. So I certainly want to be able to help with that. Also use the community, because you may be thinking I'm going to do some of these modifications and someone else is as well, and you can really help each other as you make those decisions. If you have any questions about anything else that I've covered, please let me know. I will post this addendum somewhere that people can access it. Again, just know it's not tech edited. And I hope you are ready to cast on and have fun with us. Okay,